I'm Charlie Sykes. Welcome to November 2025 and the To the Contrary podcast. Look, we have a lot of things to talk about today, including keeping my scorecard up to date on who we're going to war with this week. I mean, I had Venezuela down, but apparently I have to add Mexico and Nigeria. We had that Great Gatsby party on the night before all of the food stamp benefits were supposed to expire, which seems like the metaphor showrunners are like working overtime. Donald Trump goes on the new 60 Minutes show and says that he doesn't even know the guy that he just pardoned, the crypto billionaire. We'll talk about that. We have big elections all around the country, including in New York City, Virginia, and New Jersey. Also, MAGA right seems to be melting down on this whole question of can we have any enemies on the right, including neo-Nazis? Tough times for the Heritage Foundation, and we have some new polls out. So joining me on the podcast today, Daniel Drezner, who actually made me happy with something you wrote yesterday, which is very rare in 2025. We have to get to the wars. We have to get to the foreign policy, the trade, all of that stuff. But could we just take a few moments to talk about baseball? And the piece that you wrote, Thank You Baseball, the best World Series since 2016 was an epic novel. You were deep in it, weren't you? I mean, this was a hell of a World Series.
Oh, yeah. I mean, first of all, full disclosure, I'm a Boston Red Sox fan, so ordinarily I would like to see my team advance to the playoffs. Mm-hmm. I assume you're a Brewers fan, Charlie?
Yes, absolutely, of course.
Yeah, so your team had a bit of a brutal ending in terms of the Dodgers sort of we did. Dispatching them. And I think a lot of people thought that the Dodgers were going to be able to dispatch the Toronto Blue Jays with equal amounts of with equally minimal effort. And the Dodgers are a team that is hard to root for at this point because they are the best team money can buy in a lot of ways. And I don't begrudge their ownership for doing that. I begrudge the rest of the owners for not, trying to compete with them. But this was this was a World Series where first, the Blue Jays surprised the Dodgers. They absolutely stomped them on game one. Yeah. And then the Dodgers won game two and won an 18-inning game three that I did not stay up to watch till the end of. I think I lasted till the 12th inning. And when the Dodgers won there, I think everyone thought, well, okay, the series is over. It's going to be the Dodgers. Sure. And then Blue Jays won the next two games, and suddenly the momentum shifted back. And the last two games were going to be in Toronto. And I don't know if I assume you watched the games. The Rogers Center's crowd was just was really on their feet. It was quite impressive. And the Dodgers, to their credit, won game six and came back to win game seven, down 3-0 and 4-2. And just the feats of athletic prowess in this series were awe-inspiring. I mean, Shohei Ohtani is a two-way player. He was both
just amazing.
In that 18-inning game, he was on base all 9 times he went up for bat. In part because after I think the second or third hit, the Toronto manager basically decided, screw this, we're intentionally walking him every time. Vladimir Guerrero Jr. was equally transcendent for the Blue Jays, not just as a hitter, but on the field. He made a couple of tremendous catches that I didn't know he had that in him. And, it was just a seesaw battle. And there were some tremendous plays made by both teams. And the amazing thing about Ohtani is that he was only the second best Japanese pitcher on the Dodgers this World Series. I think it's Yabusori Yamamoto. Mm-hmm. Just a truly epic performance. He pitched a complete game victory in game two, won game six, and the next night, after throwing about 100 pitches the night before, came in and threw 2 2/3.
That was amazing. That was amazing.
It was like the series. It was like this was the 1925 World Series, because normally the trend has been, pitchers to the trend has been to baby pitchers, for lack of a better putting it.
Absolutely.
And this was just an Iron Man competition. I couldn't believe that. And
well, I mean, just to be able to watch Ohtani. I mean, what Ohtani did to the Brewers. I mean, the Brewer defeat was painful, but the game that he put up, was going to be one of the greatest of all time. One of the greatest of all time performances. So, I mean, reading your stuff, you're not a fan of either one of these teams, and usually you need a rooting, just some rooting interest in order to get as deep into it. And yet, it was such a masterpiece, as you said, that every once in a while there's a World Series so good, so competitive, so filled with so many ridiculous ups and downs, that staying disinterested is no longer possible. The drama is too damn compelling. So much happens that it is impossible not to yell at television because of what just happened. I imagine it was noisy at the Drezner household.
Actually, this is, I think, one of the other reasons I enjoyed it. My son, who is in his 20s and lives about an hour away, came over to watch. Spent the weekend at our house and watched both Game 6 and Game 7. And the two of us were it was one of those games where you just started laughing because something extraordinary happened and you couldn't believe it. The Blue Jays came within literally a microsecond of winning the game of winning the series. Because in Game 7, they had the bases loaded, and there was a ground ball that the second baseman bobbled, and the runner on third almost made it home, but not quite, and they lose the next inning.
Again, for people wondering why we're spending time talking about baseball, is because we need a break from everything else, from the flood of everything else, to be able to sort of step outside the news cycle and just experience the true joy of something that's just quintessentially, well, it is quintessentially American, even though this was obviously international. So as we ease into everything else, though, I assume that you followed the party weekend, the Halloween party weekend. A lot of people had Halloween parties. That at Mar-a-Lago, Donald Trump chose to have a great Gatsby party on the eve of the shutdown of SNAP benefits. Now, I mean, it does feel like the metaphors are just straining. I mean, week earlier, you have the president posting that video of himself shitting on fellow Americans. Then you have him tearing down the White House. And it's like somebody's going, okay, what else can we do to really drive home what this administration's about? Let's have a black tie, wretched wealth at Mar-a-Lago when 40 million people are about to lose their food stamp benefits. I mean, they just don't give a shit anymore, do they, Dan?
Charlie, have you ever seen, this is not a great movie, but have you ever seen a movie that came out in the early 80s starring Richard Pryor called Brewster's Millions?
Oh, sure. Yeah, we all saw that.
Right. So you remember the premise, right? That he's this long, very distant relative of a multimillionaire who dies. And the challenge that Brewster has is that he can inherit the whole fortune, but he first has to spend $10 million and spend it down. He can't have any valuable assets at the end of it. And so, it's just watching him try to come up with ways to waste money. There is a small part of me that wonders whether someone did Steve Bannon or Susan Wiles or someone else just make a bet with Trump that said, I bet you can't get your approval rating under 35. Your base is so rock solid. It doesn't matter what you do. They'll be with you, because this stuff doesn't even even if you have a rooting interest in Trump succeeding, this stuff doesn't make sense. It's, as you say, it is almost designed to maximize the callousness. There might be some Americans who go for that, but most people just think it's a tremendously dickish way to cope with what's going on.
Well, the dickishness is there. I mean, so we have a new CNN poll showing that he now has a 63% disapproval rating, which is actually 1 point above the 62% disapproval rating he had when he left office after January 7th. So it's working. I guess, part of it is on this that, the one thing that Trump had going for him was that he was the voice of the little man, right? He was running on this populist wave, and Democrats had an elitism problem, an intellectual elitism problem. But if you really, really wanted to undermine your populist cred and make people think, okay, maybe you're not necessarily on my side, it's like they're running a weird playbook and the only thing I can attribute it to is sort of the arrogance and the hubris that I can do absolutely everything, and we're just going to try it all because my base is so solid. I mean, how else do you explain it?
I mean, I will say this. There is an aspirational quality, I suspect, to some of Trump's base and to Americans more generally, where, I think this is something that Democrats have been frustrated by for a long time, where they try to point to billionaire excess or what, how can you tolerate this? And the answer, I think, is that a lot of people who aren't necessarily that well off right now see themselves, they're optimistic. They think, well, I could be that person someday, and I want to be able to do those things. And what I think is interesting is that right now, however, The reason this isn't working is because as the economy starts to sour, as you see headline after headline about mass layoffs, as prices continue to rise and people start feeling the effects of the tariffs even more, Americans are less optimistic about the future. And so so the aspirational thing becomes less credible, it becomes more fantasy based. And so I think an increasing number of Americans are actually having that perspective of, this is not what I signed up for. This is a party perennial of 2025, which is people who voted for Trump saying, yeah, I wanted them to do this thing. I wasn't in favor of this other thing.
This point about being aspirational is really actually important, because I remember having a conversation back in 2016 about, how could he be pulling off, this remake of himself as a populist when he's got, gold-plated toilets. And I said, okay, you need to understand how a lot of Americans look at him. They see him as this incredibly successful businessman.
Yes.
Okay, it's all bullshit. So they see a guy, when he stands up there, he's living the American dream. He's a billionaire. He's got his own airplane. He's married to a supermodel. They like the whole package. And Donald Trump knew that. Now, as I said, that wears out after a while. So let's talk about this weird CBS interview over the weekend, since we have to keep moving here. Trump says he has no idea who Binance's CZ is after pardoning him. What is the guy's name? Is the founder of this crypto company, Changpeng Zhao? Would that be?
Yeah,
pretty close. So he grants him a pardon last month. It's one of the sleaziest moments in a tremendously sleazy administration. Nothing really stands out. CZ had pleaded guilty to failing to sufficiently combat money laundering on his crypto exchange, and he's involved with World Liberty Financial, which is a crypto finance platform that sends 75% of token sales revenue to a company linked to, Donald Trump and his family. So he's asked about this.
Charlie, that's just a coincidence, I'm sure.
So he's asked about this by Norah O'Donnell, and amazingly, the president of the United States says, okay, are you ready? I don't know who he is. I have no idea. I just heard things. Okay, make it make sense.
Again, part of this is what I keep coming back to is, again, all through the campaign and all through this year, Donald Trump has talked about how, I don't know if we can trust the Biden pardons because maybe they used an auto pen or something, or Biden is old and feeble and he doesn't know what he's doing. And I'm beginning to wonder if this is just self-projection, because he's basically admitting he pardoned this guy with no reason whatsoever, except someone must have told him, hey, this would be a really good idea. And this ties into what you said before, which is the one area where this administration has been truly and legitimately innovative is that they have found brand new ways to legalize corruption, or to basically tolerate corruption. The crypto thing in particular is just an astonishing example of, finding a sort of end around whereby anyone, domestic or foreign, can basically buy Trump off by buying into their crypto scheme. And there's no, there's nothing stopping it. And so it honestly is, there's a way in which I'm kind of impressed by that kind of innovation. Of course, it's awful for U.S. foreign policy and for U.S. policy more generally. It basically
government integrity.
It erodes the norm of, one of the things that the U.S. had going for it was the idea that corruption is not a strategy that is going to work in the long term here. And with Trump, it's going to work for at least a little while, and it's a profoundly depressing development.
It is profoundly, depressing, and of course, it puts other Republicans in this weird position. I mean, I'm thinking about Mike Johnson, who now has had several weeks. It's not like he's got a day job to do. Every day they ask him about some other outrage, and every day Mike Johnson says, "I haven't heard that story. I knew nothing about that story. I never read the papers. I never look at my phone. I never do anything." And all of the Republican candidates who are running have they cannot distance themselves from Trump in any way. I think it was Jonathan Martin in Politico who said this is kind of like the Democrats, their superpower is that they're running against people who are joined absolutely and irretrievably at the hip of Donald Trump, right? So if you're running in New Jersey or you're running in Virginia and you're asked, so what do you think of Donald Trump? A+, best president ever, no problems, didn't see it, whatever. So
yeah, I mean it's been an ongoing problem, and I don't see it changing anytime soon because Trump's superpower within the GOP remains the fact that if you cross him, he can make sure that you get primaried or make sure that you don't have a political future within the party. It's the one thing that he did from the get-go when he first came into office in 2017. Basically, he has colonized the GOP. And so as a result, yes, like you, I've been extremely amused by Mike Johnson is less informed than your typical new college freshman at this point. That's how little reading he does. But it's almost become sort of kabuki theater where anytime Trump does something ridiculous, it's not just Johnson. Almost every member of Congress Republican member of Congress pretends that they're not aware of what's going on, even though they obviously are.
So, again, we're almost, 16 minutes into this conversation. Haven't mentioned the fact that the government is actually continues to be shut down. I think we're headed toward a record. The polls and then, by the way, I'm not into the polls in a big way here, so bear with me. The polls would seem to suggest that so far the public is blaming Republicans rather than Democrats, and I am mildly surprised that the Democrats actually are pulling this off. That they actually seem to have. I mean, they were playing a dangerous, very, very risky hand. And now we've gotten to the point where we've gotten to the elections, which are Tuesday, which we can get to in a moment. A lot of focus on the food stamp benefits, and of course these massive increases in healthcare premiums, which they've built it all around. So, is this your read that the Democrats seem to be doing better than one would have expected, given their track record on quote unquote winning the shutdown? As if anybody wins.
I mean, I would say so, but I would issue two large caveats on this. The first is, again, recall what Trump has done over the last month while the government has been shut down. Normally, when the government shuts down, the president takes it seriously. They're trying to negotiate with the other party.
Pretends to, yeah.
They make it a big deal. And, he went on an Asian tour, which, to be fair, was previously scheduled. But I think Obama canceled his trip to the Far East. When a shutdown threatened them. He went down to Florida and had this great Gatsby party. He decided that he would tear down the East Wing. There were all sorts of events where I was like, wait, isn't the government shut down? Why are you doing this? How can you do this? And so it's not just the Democrats' messaging, which has been perfectly adequate. It is also that the Republicans' messaging on this has been horrible. And the other problem the Republicans have, and this is particularly true, I think, for uninformed voters, is that their logic is, look, this is the ball's in the Democrats' court. We can't do anything. And that just doesn't pass the smell test because even uninformed voters are fully aware that Republicans control the presidency, the Senate, and the House. And so there is a small part where the Republicans, I'm sure, are a little frustrated about this because it's true. Because of the filibuster, they need Democrats to vote on stuff. But the problem is they are trying to paint themselves as powerless, and that dog won't hunt.
Well, you mentioned something interesting, and this looked like it was going to be a big story over the weekend. Turns out not to be, at least as far as our conversation right now. Donald Trump demanded that Senate Republicans nuke the filibuster. Now, he's done that. He did that before during his first term. It seems as if in one of the rare occasions Republicans are saying no, we're just not going to do it.
It is actually one of the few times, the Republican members of the Senate have decided, no, we actually like our institutional prerogative here because they recognize that there might come a time when they're in the minority. Susan Glasser of the New Yorker last week published a column about what had surprised everyone over the Trump second term. And she asked a bunch of people, including me. And my answer was, I have genuinely been surprised at the abject fecklessness of sort of House and Senate GOP leadership. I mean, I get they want to be loyal to Trump, but they have just completely surrendered almost all their institutional prerogatives, on tariffs, on the budget. And that's the part where I honestly have been a little surprised. I was not expecting Mike Johnson. to be
Well,
this.
you're surprised. I'm surprised. The founding fathers, I think, are completely gobsmacked by it because, of course, they drew up a constitution that just simply assumed that Congress would have a great deal of power and never imagined that people would just voluntarily turn themselves into potted plants.
No, I
So,
said this is an unfortunate falsification of Madison's, I think, Federalist 10, where ambition is supposed to counteract ambition. And it turns out that the ambition that most Republican members of the Congress have is to just stay in the good graces of Donald Trump.
Yeah. So you and James Madison. So let's talk a little bit about the elections that are coming up.
Sure.
We're going to be so much smarter on Wednesday morning, and we're going to have all of the hot takes and everything. Obviously, the major contest would be Virginia governor, New Jersey governor, New York mayor. Now the California referendum vote is Tuesday.
Correct, yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Now that's a very, very big deal, obviously, for Gavin Newsom. So. I don't know. Do you have any takes on all of this? Because my sense is that both parties are going to say they had a really good night. If the Democrats win the governorship, that's objectively a good night. Republicans can barely conceal their giddiness about the prospect of nationalizing the New York City mayor's race with Zoran Mamdani. You had some thoughts about the focus on the New York City mayor's race on social media, I believe.
I did. I also wrote a Substack post about this, which was the only Substack post I have written and never intend to write about the New York mayoral election, which is, I swear to God, I wish everyone would shut up about it. Don't get me wrong. If you're a New Yorker, this is an important race. And there is no doubt some compelling, personal and political drama. Also, I honestly, and I confess this is my own fault, I was not aware of the Eric Adams video involving looking for guns or drugs in your kids' rooms, and it was just it is something to behold. So I get, and also New York is the media capital of the world, so I get why this has been overcovered. But I think the thing that does bother me about it is this presumption, and this is not a new presumption. This has been going on for every New York mayoral election since Giuliani was mayor. Is the presumption that whoever wins the New York mayor's race is offering a template for how a national campaign should be run.
Exactly.
And just kill me now, Charlie, because that is so evidently false and falsified by previous elections. Giuliani attempted to then run for president and crashed and burned. Bloomberg attempted to run for president, and Elizabeth Warren ended his campaign in 60 seconds. And Bill de Blasio, no one remembers this, also tried to run for president and dropped out before the first primary. Now, Mamdani can't do this because he's not a natural-born U.S. citizen, but I know everyone is talking about Mamdani as an example of this is how you run an exciting campaign for progressives, and no doubt that may very well be true. But this would be like Republicans drawing a lesson from the second Oklahoma district of how to, nationalize a campaign. The New York voters do not represent, New York City voters are not emblematic of the wider country, nor are deep red, congressional districts. And so I think this is the thing that frustrates me. If you are a progressive Democrat, you should be obviously happy, I guess, that Mamdani looks like he's going to win. That's fine. And there might be certain campaign tactics that he has done in terms of, engaging disaffected voters that might play or might travel. But the idea that a Mamdani platform is going to play well in rural Pennsylvania or the suburbs of Nevada, I find highly risible. And also, I do think Republicans are not going to really succeed in making Mamdani the face of the face of the Democratic Party. They can try. Mamdani's not an idiot, and I'm pretty sure he'll be able to deflect a fair amount of that in the same way that, let's say, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez can. So I get why Republicans are giddy. I get why progressives are giddy. I just, want to yell a line from a movie that both you and I watched when we were kids called Meatballs. It just doesn't matter.
It just doesn't matter. So
this is a good segue. It just doesn't matter. Sorry.
No, I love that movie too. So, now fact check me if I'm wrong in this, because all my information comes from. I get more information apparently than Mike Johnson, but all my information comes from social media. Is Jeremy Corbyn actually appearing at a Mamdani event? The
I did
former
see
labor
some
leader.
headline to that effect. Again,
Yeah.
I'm not joking when I say I've been trying to tune out the election, but I did see something to that effect, which isn't a great thing if you're Mamdani.
No,
but
and so with this comes back to the way that Trump and the Republicans try to weaponize things like anti-Semitism, accusing Mamdani of anti-Semitism because of what he said in the past about whatever. So this is the segue. It's very interesting to me how much energy the Trump administration and the right have put into going after anti-Semitism on university campuses. We all know that. We don't need to go into that. The attack, the number of university presidents who lost their jobs because they were not more forceful in standing up to it. And here we are, as you and I are speaking, and the right is embroiled in I won't call it a civil war, but it is a nasty shitstorm over right-wing anti-Semitism. And of course, people probably know this by now. You had the Tucker Carlson, who platformed neo-Nazi Nick Fuentes, and it was a very friendly, very, very chatty conversation. That generated a lot of controversy. Then you had the president of the Heritage Foundation, Kevin Roberts, for reasons best known to him, parachuting into the controversy, basically defending Tucker Carlson and saying, that Nick Fuentes shouldn't be canceled, and all hell has broken loose. I understand that Ben Shapiro has devoted his entire show to attacking Tucker Carlson. Ted Cruz is attacking Tucker Carlson. But what's pretty obvious is that it's dawning on a lot of people that the MAGA right has a real anti-Semitism problem, which strikes me as really as completely predictable, by the way, if you've been following the trajectory of things, but also ironic considering the incredible projection of the right about anti-Semitism from the left. What do you make of all this?
I mean, I think this is emblematic of you could argue that if Trump had a political strategy to rise to power, it was, there had long been on the Republican side an idea of thou shalt not criticize fellow conservatives. That's sort of it was the 11th commandment. But that referred to Republicans that were elected and usually were not consorting with neo-Nazis. I think what was interesting was Trump. One of Trump's consistent things from when he first entered the national stage in 2015 was that he refused to disavow racists. He refused to disavow, armed militias or as it turns out, neo-Nazis. And this has now become, I think, with Trump as the head of the party, the general doctrine of the party, which is we shall not criticize enemies on the right, or shall not criticize anyone to the right of us. What we want to focus on and keep our fire on is on the left. And that led to that truly bizarre Kevin Roberts video that you highlighted that I think it's safe to say backfired pretty badly on Heritage. And there's a lot of speculation now that I think his former chief of staff, what is his name?
Newhouse.
I think so. Yes. Ryan Newhouse. Yeah. That he was responsible for this. But it actually highlights the true devolution of Heritage as a think tank, where they become much more doctrinaire, much more in the bag for Trump. Roberts, among other things, refuses to acknowledge that Trump lost the 2020 election. It's sort of going full Claremont at this point in terms of that organization. What is interesting is that Roberts, I think himself, seems to have recognized that maybe this was a misstep, because he then released another tweet where he blasted Nick Fuentes himself, saying, "I don't tolerate this," which of course raises the question of, well, then why are you tolerating Tucker Carlson tolerating it?
It's a tangled web, and they're deeply meshed in it.
The one thing I will say, I think the issue here is that I do think there are some on the right that are concerned about the tight relationship between the United States and Israel, particularly given what has happened since the October 7th attacks and Israel's prosecution of the war. And the one thing I will agree with, or at least partially agree with Kevin Roberts on, is that it should be possible to criticize Israel without being accused of being anti-Semitic. Now, that said, Nick Fuentes is a raging anti-Semite. This is not
that's a long way from that.
That is a long way. Yeah. So like, if Roberts wants to hire someone to critique why the U.S. should support Israel, that's fine. That's actually an interesting thing to do. That's not what he's doing. I think this is more about sort of following Trump's lead when it comes to politics. Remember, Trump had dinner, was it in October, like fall of 2023 with
Fuentes.
With Fuentes and with
Kanye West. Whatever.
Yeah, Kanye.
And remember what he said afterwards? He said, I like this guy. This guy gets me. He's referring to Nick Fuentes. See, I think, one of the puzzles with Trump is that, Trump's got a Jewish daughter. He's got, Jewish grandchildren. And my critique of him, and I've been writing about this now for 10 years, I'm exhausted by it. It's not whether or not Trump himself is anti-Semitic or not, because I can't possibly know. It's that he certainly gave permission. He opened the door to them. He refused to condemn them. And he sent one signal after another, one winking signal after another to the folks at Charlottesville and others. So what he has done is he's taken the people we used to call the alt-right, and he has helped mainstream them. And people like J.D. Vance come to their defense. And by the way, Vance's role in this, I think, we need to highlight this, because this didn't take place in a vacuum. Remember, it was just like last week or the week before, we had all those young Republicans who were in their text chain, and who came to their defense but J.D. Vance. And J.D. Vance has made the calculation that he's not going to be outflanked on the right. He's not going to call out, these folks. And so a lot of the anger that you're seeing on the right about, like, how the hell did we get here, which, by the way, if only you'd been warned, is a recognition
if only someone had predicted that this might be the consequences. Yes.
Yeah. Actually, back in 2017, I even wrote about what was take out the word neo from neo-Nazi, the Stürmer or whatever it was, what was the Stormfront or something like that? The Nazi newspaper, and they were all in for Trump, and there were
the Daily Stormer, I think, was,
something like that, and there were plenty of opportunities for Trump and for Melania to distance himself, and they didn't. And all of those folks recognized, okay, this is a green light for us. And now, 10 years later, everybody's shocked to find out that these guys are hanging around.
I suppose if there's some marginal good news from this, it is that you are seeing people who normally do not have spines actually decide this is kind of reprehensible. So I think
Ted Cruz.
Ted Cruz, Ted Cruz is what I'm thinking of. And again, I don't want to praise him in any way, because this is literally the bare minimum that he's done. But that said, he did do the bare minimum, and there are others that have not. So I do, acknowledge that point. I think Robert George, actually, who's a conservative professor at Princeton, might have given some of them intellectual cover to say, yes, for the love of God, this is ridiculous.
Oh yeah, well, he's a principled man. No, I think that this is where you come back to Kevin Roberts, who has enshittified heritage, which obviously played a huge role in Project 2025, to the point where he apparently was numb or deaf to the fact that, hey, there are still some red lines, and neo-Nazi, Hitler fan, Holocaust denial is still a red line. And this is what seemed to have taken him by surprise. So he's sitting around with his chief of staff and going, this is how we need to talk to the kids. The bros want to hear this kind of stuff. And it's like, suddenly you have everyone rising up and going, okay, no, we have gone so far down this road of MAGA. We have thrown away so many principles. We've embraced so much cruelty and brutality. But the Hitler Holocaust thing, that seems to us to be a bridge too far. So kudos to Ted Cruz, but it is, as you point out, kind of the bare minimum, man.
But this actually touches on something. I would say two things on this. The first is, I am legitimately curious about whether or not this affects Heritage's fundraising, because Heritage, more than most think tanks, they have a pretty dedicated donor base. And what I'm wondering is whether Roberts is making the calculation that as many people as he's turned off from this, it means like a 8 or 9 figure Peter Thiel donation or something like that. And he would probably make that trade-off.
Or Elon Musk, yeah.
Or Elon Musk, yes.
Yeah.
The second thing I would say is you were talking about how out of touch, a lot of a lot of MAGA folks are. I was, reading both the Atlantic and the New York Times had stories this past week about how so many Trump officials, White House officials, and cabinet officials, are now living on military bases. They're basically decided, and I do want to be fair here because some of these people have actually received legitimate threats of violence against, and in that instance, it's probably justified that they move on to these bases. But it has now become almost like a perk or a prestige action of like, do you get a plum position or plum, house on a military base? But
these are not just barracks. These are big houses. These are mansions, right?
Right.
Suitable for big entertainment.
Yeah. And what I kept thinking is like, in some ways, the MAGA community, they're trying to basically create their own government subsidized Mar-a-Lago in the DC area, which means that is one step further removed from, just even waiting in line at a Starbucks, or, interacting with ordinary people. And this is how you lose any sense of empathy about what's going on in the rest of the world.
Well, I'm really glad you brought this up. This is really extraordinary. It is a symbolism of the elites, like almost like the Soviet Politburo elites would have their own compounds, right? And so
in their own
they
stores,
are complete. They're insulated from critics and from protesters, but also insulated from real life while living in this very, very rarefied environment. No, I mean that is one of the strangest kinds of things. So that they've created their own little. It is sort of the man in the high castle kind of stuff.
Yeah. Sorry. And the other thing is that they're only interacting with each other now. So again, this makes them, even more out of touch. So it's just something to keep an eye on if you are surprised by, other actions that seem politically tone deaf. This might be one of the reasons.
Okay, so in the time that we have left, your specialty is foreign affairs. Can you on your bingo card of like all the wars that the peace president is about to launch? I mean, let's just that during that 60 Minutes interview, apparently he pulled out a sheet of all the wars that he'd solved, which was basically a tweet or something like that, and really desperately wants the Nobel Prize. At the same time that we are now talking about a land war in Venezuela, land operations in Mexico, and maybe even getting the military involved in Nigeria. I don't know. Are we going in all those places? Is it just saber rattling? Is this just Trump waving his you-know-what? What do you think?
First of all, I'm going to say again, I'm going to say one small positive thing, which is very weird, but the fact that Trump craves the Nobel Peace Prize so much is in and of itself not a bad thing. Like it's actually nice that he wants to be known as a peacemaker, as opposed to say someone who wants to be known as winning a war. Because very often, politicians know that if you often win a war, that's a surefire way to get reelected. So that I will give him a modicum of credit about, even though he has no idea how to actually negotiate stable pieces. Now, and of course, it's contradicted by the fact that he is perfectly willing to use military force. He's used it twice already. Well, 3 times now, if you count the Houthis, the Iranians, and whatever illegal activity is going on off the coast of Venezuela.
Various boats.
Yeah, various boats. And that actually the most disturbing thing I've read this week is the idea that apparently the administration has argued that they can target anyone, I think, within 3 hops of a drug of the drug cartels. Charlie, you and I are probably 3 hops away from, a drug cartel. That's not a hard connection to make. And I think it's a dangerously tenuous assumption or doctrine to have. But that said, you were asking about Nigeria, about Mexico, and about Venezuela. I think Nigeria is just a bluff. The one thing that Trump is successful at is that all he has to do is post something on Truth Social, and you get at least 24 hours of media coverage about, are we going to go to war with someone? I find it hard to believe that he would actually send troops into Nigeria. It would be it would defy all sorts of logic. Now, that said, it would be as illogical as throwing a Great Gatsby party when the government is shut down. So that doesn't mean that it won't happen. And this is the disturbing thing. There's no there are no adults in the room at this point. Like, no one is going to push back on him, on this. I mean, maybe Vance might, because I think he would view that as a potentially bombing too far. Although, again, if it's a Christian thing, he'll probably go along with it. The Mexico thing, I think, what is interesting is the fact that he's announcing these sort of covert missions, because traditionally covert missions are not supposed to be announced.
That's what the word covert means, right?
Yeah, that's as I understanding it, you're not supposed to do that. But it is possible that, it kind of depends on what the Mexicans, respond to this. I could see the Mexicans tolerating some degree of sort of on the ground U.S. presence, so long as it doesn't become a story. There's a way in which this going public actually makes Scheinbaum less likely to authorize it. And if that happens, I think Trump will sable rattle, but in the end, it'll probably be a negotiation that we won't notice about, because I don't think U.S. forces are going to be comfortable operating in Mexico without the awareness and indeed cooperation of Mexican officials.
Yeah. And to your point, I can't imagine President Scheinbaum now politically being able to green light foreign troops any more than any American president could countenance foreign troops on American soil. I mean, just think about that. Just what that would feel like.
The Venezuela one, I honestly don't know. I think there's a couple of possibilities on this one. The first is that this might be a rare case where it's not so much Trump. Trump wants to do it. Like, he obviously, I think, is incredibly annoyed that Maduro is still around, particularly after he tried to sanction him, last go around. Yeah. The difference this time is that in Marco Rubio and Stephen Miller, he's got two powerful aides that really want to see Maduro gone. And so it might be that he's being egged on in a way that he wasn't during his first term. And I think it wouldn't surprise, it doesn't surprise me that they might be some of the folks behind the more aggressive moves, the more, the targeting of fishing boats. But the thing that this most reminds me of from Trump's first term is what he tried to do towards North Korea before he wound up actually meeting with Kim Jong-un, which is, if you remember, launched all kinds of bellicose rhetoric, taunted Kim in his UN General Assembly address, evacuated all sort of dependents from South Korea, indicating we're preparing for war. I mean, it was about and then imposed a maximum pressure campaign. And, it alarmed a lot of people. I mean, the idea was that we could actually do this. And then the North Koreans sent out a feeler saying, hey, can we have a meeting? And that was when Trump took the bait. I don't know if Maduro offering to meet with Trump is going to have the same effect, but I'm also pretty sure that this is the fundamental question revolves around whether Trump is convinced or is persuaded by others that if he actually takes military action in Venezuela, it'll be a cakewalk. If he thinks it'll be a cakewalk, he'll do it. Like, Trump's military record on the use of force is actually extremely consistent, no matter what anyone thinks about the madman theory, which is if he thinks his opponent will fold quickly, he is happy to use force. He is happy to use limited amounts of force and then walk away and declare victory. I don't think he's going to be able to do that in Venezuela. But then again, I don't have Marco Rubio in one ear and Stephen Miller in the other telling me that it'll be a cakewalk.
Yeah, no, and that's excellent. And as you point out, there are no other grown-ups in the room. We ought to at least mention before we close up here that there's also the Epstein files out there. They are still hanging fire. There's still an obsession on the part of Donald Trump and Mike Johnson not to release them. I think just the contrast between the way they are playing out in Great Britain and here is pretty significant. Watching Prince Andrew being stripped of his title and his house. Yeah. The ambassador being sacked, that the Brits are actually taking rather aggressive, very, very dramatic historic action because of the Epstein files. Well, are in this country, no prominent American has been treated that way. So again, that's stay tuned, because that's still coming. Daniel Drezner, always a pleasure talking with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you all for listening to this episode of To the Contrary podcast. Just a reminder, we are not crazy ones.